Hello chums, and welcome to Taming a Monster, the series where I take some of Gran Turismo 7's most ridiculous cars to see if I can tweak them so that a talentless pleb like me can handle them without being killed to death. Like any common ruffian, I'm using a bog standard PlayStation 5 controller, and I have all driver assists turned off, except for ABS. Let's see what car is trying to murder me today! Gran Turismo 7 is currently awash with 1000 horsepower engine swaps. We have Chiron swaps for days, R35 swaps, and my most hated is the Turbo DKH drift car engine. However, the latest update added a new contender with the Porsche 911 turbo engine. A flat 6 turbo swap for an Impreza was a pretty fantastic choice for one of the first. While the Impreza has a reputation for being easy to drive, how will it fare with 1060 horsepower? As usual, it has every upgrade applied, including the wide body and the body rigidity increase. However, none of the tuning parts have yet been adjusted except for the downforce, which is maxed, and the transmission, which has already been adjusted to suit this car. The Subaru Impreza has wheels one size up from standard. Increasing the wheel size can make the car feel quicker to change direction, though this can sometimes come at the expense of some stability, as well as the car's ability to absorb bumps. The car has a front splitter for front downforce, the rear bumper spats which add rear downforce, and as a result of that we don't need the giant custom wing set, so we can get away with only adding the rear lip spoiler. If you're interested in learning more about aero, downforce, or any other aspect of tuning your car, I have a series called Tuning for Beginners which covers everything from suspension to differential to the transmission. I chose Fuji as the test track for the WRX. 1000 horsepower and all-wheel drive make for a fittingly violent launch, allowing the car to pass half of the field before turn 1. The car's brakes aren't terrible, but they clearly weren't designed for the sheer amount of power this car is making. The primary characteristic this car exhibited is understeer, especially when accelerating out of corners. Curiously, most all-wheel drive cars also have a tendency to oversteer when braking, but this Subaru had almost none. While the car is numb, it's already easy to drive, so although this car might not be a monster in the traditional sense, there's still plenty we can do to improve it. My first adjustments were to the differential. I reduced initial torque to improve the car's agility. Increasing acceleration sends more power to the outside wheels, helping the car pull itself around corners, and reducing braking sensitivity will improve the brake feel. The car felt slightly more responsive, with understeer generally reduced. The car still had some understeer, particularly when accelerating though, which would partly be caused by the soft suspension causing the front end to lift with the incredible power and traction. It also felt very unresponsive at high speeds, which is mostly due to the high rear downforce. Next up, I increased the anti-roll bars, more so at the rear to prevent braking oversteer, which these cars can be prone to. I then increased natural frequency to reduce body roll, which will hopefully reduce the front end lift when accelerating out of low speed corners. I also reduced the rear downforce to help with the understeer at high speeds. The car felt much more lively now. Accelerating out of low-speed corners didn't result in quite so much understeer, and the reduction in body roll made the car feel much nicer overall. The biggest positive was the reduced rear downforce, which helped on the high-speed right-hander. My final tweaks were to increase compression to help with bumps and curbs. I also reduced camber to help with braking distances. I also added some rear toe out, which can help the car pull itself out of corners. I also reduced the rear downforce further still, since the car felt stable enough to handle it. The Subaru 911 STI now felt more loose and slightly prone to oversteer when braking. While it's still easy to control and probably preferable on a track like this, it could cause some stability issues at the Nordschleife. There was also still a hint of understeer when accelerating out of corners. Still, it was time to take the Impreza to the Nurburgring to see how it would fare. In the end, I made a few more tweaks to the setup. I reduced rear toe out to make the car feel more secure. I increased initial torque at the front to make the car slightly more predictable, and I also increased acceleration sensitivity at the rear to help reduce power understeer. The WRX is a weird one in relation to the other four-wheel drive monsters I've featured in this series so far. We have over 1000 horsepower and excellent traction, meaning this car should be a contender for getting close to a 6-minute lap. However, this car won't get close. At least not in my hands anyway. The reason for this is downforce. If you look at all of the cars so far that have managed to get under 6 minutes 20 seconds in this series, they all have one thing in common: rear diffusers. All of the fastest cars have the capability of at least 200 downforce at the front, where this Subaru only gets 100 downforce at the front, and that makes a big difference. If you ignore the downforce, you would expect by the stats alone that this car should be a rival for the Mitsubishi GTO, no matter which engine that car has, since this car is lighter and has an extra gear. However, the lack of front downforce really hurts this car's potential. It's generally an easy car to drive, but it's surprisingly difficult to really extract 100% from it. It took me a few attempts to get a complete lap in at the Nurburgring because I kept pushing the car too hard to try and do it justice. Despite the Impreza's drawback, I'm a big fan of this engine swap, mainly because it's different, but it's also inspired. A flat 6 turbo being fitted to a car that's usually got a flat 4 feels right, but it's also different. It's one of the few recent engine swaps where the monkey at Polyphony in charge of deciding which engine swaps are added in each update magically gains some imagination. It's rare, but it's nice. Either way, it's a hell of an improvement on that godforsaken LS7 drift car engine, or whichever supercar has the Chiron engine this week. In the end, the Subaru managed a 6 minutes 14. Not slow by any stretch, but it didn't feel like it truly represented what this car should be capable of. It is the second slowest all-wheel drive so far. So, that was my attempt to tame a monster. I hope my settings helped, or that you enjoyed this video. Join me next time, where I'm driving a car that hopefully meets its potential. Thank you very much for watching, and if you're feeling particularly generous, I would greatly appreciate your subscription. Take care, and ta-ra.